Is the right wing racist? Hey, it's Prince of Queens, and due to an article in my local newspaper about Trump voters claiming yet again that the main thing motivating Trump voters was, in fact, basically racism, and also that Trump is a result of backlash after the quote unquote social progress that was the entire Obama administration, I figured I could say what I think relatively simply. So, are Republicans and other people who are right of center on the political spectrum racist? Short answer, certainly no more so than Democrats. Why? Well, everybody is a bit racist, for one, and this manifests itself in different ways. But here's the main thing that I am learning not just from my own anecdotal interactions with people from the left and the right, but also in thoroughly examining media from both sides full time. The thing that you have to keep in mind if you're gonna ask the question as to whether or not the left or the right is more racist is that in the current year, from what it would seem, each side legitimately seems to believe that the other side is the racist one, and they use that as a talking point not uncommonly. The left, as we've all heard, generally just assumes the right to be hillbilly rednecks and beer-drinking football fans that go to Hooters a lot or something. I think this stereotype comes not just from leftist media, which occasionally depicts people this way, but also because people in leftist meccas like New York, LA, and San Francisco have basically never been outside of those areas for the past 8 years. Left-wing people live in bubbles and are vehemently opposed to leaving those bubbles, which is why struggling young creatives are willing to spend about 75% of their income on rent just to live in these places, not to mention overpriced drinks and food. They might have grown up in a red state and remembered it from 15 or 20 years ago when bigotry was a lot more pronounced due to the lack of things like the internet. So I can see where people might have an amplified negative impression of right-leaning areas. Though it does seem the overall trend over the past 10 years had been moving away from racism, minus maybe the past 3 years where it got weird, but I'll get back to that. Still, currently, these leftist people in leftist bubbles generally know very little about the right wing because they have them all blocked on social media, including their own family members, and the only thing they really know about policy issues is that Republicans in the House and Senate blocked a lot of the Obama administration's endeavors, which they assume was because, you guessed it, racism. Now, granted, there's definitely populations of right-wing people who were always blatant racists, who have also been maybe latent racists who hid it over the past years, and Republicans who are becoming racist due to recent shenanigans, mainly from Black Lives Matter supporters. Still, I wouldn't say that racism is the main motive for the majority of right-wing voters, and that is fairly evident if you spend time watching their popular pundits on YouTube. Most right-wing voters, from my perspective, mainly want smaller government and to lower taxes, though some of them do believe that black people use up a lot of tax money. However, where it gets confusing is that the vast majority of right-wing people, I know at least, seem to think that it's the left that is racist. This idea has been around for a very long time in various incarnations, obviously stemming back to the fact that it was Abe Lincoln, our first ever Republican president, who actually freed the slaves to begin with, and the fact that the KKK came from the Democratic Party. More recently, people talk about the rise of feminism and the welfare state destroying the black family and leaving black families in generations of poverty ever since the civil rights era. Now, to be fair, while I can definitely see the point in this argument, it is also used to demonize any social programs that might be ever potentially proposed. More so, People talk about things like affirmative action and now ideas of reparations and equate it to what people call the subtle bigotry of low expectations, claiming that Democrats are the real racists because they don't expect black and brown people to do well in life and therefore need assistance, which they feel is racist in itself, and they believe black and brown people should be expected to succeed just like anybody else. Now, those are just two general arguments that have been floating around basically for decades in favor of the left and the right being more racist. And I don't want to give my opinion on either side too much about the general argument that's been floating around for decades, as I can see both perspectives. Again, everybody is a bit racist anyway, so arguing about who is more racist is all this comes down to. However, over recent years, there's been two main things that have really been game changers in contemporary race dialogues, and those are obviously Black Lives Matter and the notion that supposedly only white people can be racist in America. And it should be of note that both things are pretty much exclusively products of the left. Now, a lot of people might not know this about me, but I was in favor of Black Lives Matter for at least a year, though I always saw it being a bit divisive in practice. Of course, once I really got into YouTube and found the plethora of black critics of the movement who really dissected it like Some Black Guy, That Guy T, and Tree of Logic, I basically stopped supporting the movement of Black Lives Matter entirely. Still, I thought it was a good idea initially, perhaps naively, and they were just executing their tactics poorly, in my opinion, and I even tried to offer PR advice to my social spheres. Usually met with the standard, "We don't care what you think, white boy," responses. So that was rather annoying, and I earned a bit of a reputation as a problem white guy that tells black people how to feel about their own oppression. Or whatever. This reputation was amplified because I never, for a moment, even catered to the notion that only white people can be racist. Because, as I've mentioned in other videos, I had heard that only white people can be racist from very obvious racists in the 90s, so I knew what type of attitude came from that train of thought. That all said, when Black Lives Matter and people saying, "Only white people can be racist" started really happening a lot around 2012, I believe, non-coincidentally, around the same time Obama legalized the usage of propaganda on the American people, a lot of people from the right and the general center began getting nervous about the state of race relations in our nation, as did people from the left, like myself. People thought it was unproductive to blame every problem in the entire black community on the police force. They didn't think that telling racial minorities that hating white people was not actually racist, and they didn't think anything productive would come from all of that. And all the while, these people were being called racists just for having these opinions. Opinions which, to the people who objected, were inherently non-racist opinions. Ironically, they felt that they were being called racist for being anti-racist. So, with that in mind, with all of the relentless allegations that people who said all lives matter were racist, or that people were bigots if they tried their best to not see color, it started to look to a lot of people who weren't firmly aligned with the MTV, BuzzFeed, CNN, New York Times, and Huffington Post mentality towards sociopolitical discourse. It started to look to many people in 2015 and 2016 that the only way to not be considered racist in the mainstream was to actually be a racist. It was at this point that people became firm in their convictions that yes, In fact, it was the Democrats who were the real racists, because all of the same organizations who were supporting Black Lives Matter and were saying that only white people can be racist were also telling us that the Democratic Party is awesome and that Trump is an evil, racist, Cheeto baby eater. So, regardless of what your opinions are on any of that, you should really know that a gigantic portion of right-wing voters, or people who ended up voting for Trump because they saw him as the lesser of two evils, are not simple racists, but very specifically voted the way that they did because they seemed to think that it was the less racist thing to do. They voted for Trump to avoid being racist. Drop me a comment and stay tuned.